Hello everyone, welcome to Sir Psych, and today we're going to be talking about INTJs and relationships. Now this is actually a topic that I made a video for more than 4 years ago here on the channel. It's one of the earliest topics that I had made a video for. But I wanted to revisit it and talk about the things that I've discovered and learned since then as somebody who is not only in a relationship that's been lasting that long since then, but also as someone who's been a personality typology coach and worked with people in relationships through the lens of personality type since then. And it just gives more up-to-date information. But before we get into the video, I actually want to take a minute to talk about, for the first time on this channel, a sponsor for this video. Let me introduce you really quick to Boo. Boo is an MBTI and personality typology focused dating and social app that allows you to find other people based on your MBTI type, your interests, and your just general preferences. When you download the app for the first time, it's going to have you take a brief quiz that's going to help you find and identify your personality type if you don't already know it, and it actually managed to type me correctly as an INTJ. But if you already know your personality type, or if it doesn't get it right, you can actually override this to have your own result put in there. You're then going to be able to find other people who have similar interests or maybe different interests depending on what you're looking for based on your personality type and just your general preferences. You can look for people locally, you can look for people around the world, and generally you're just going to be able to find people and talk to people based on your MBTI type and again, your preferences. The thing I enjoyed the most about Boo when I actually downloaded it to check it out is that it's not only just a dating app, it's also a social app, and that you could use it to look for not only romantic partners, but friends. So thank you to Boo for sponsoring this video, and I highly recommend you all go down into the description box below and click on my link for Boo so you can check out this app. Thanks again. So INTJs and relationships. This is an interesting topic in my opinion because INTJs are the type that are really known for struggling with relationships. And today I'm going to talk about not only how it might be easier as an INTJ to find a romantic partner, but also maybe if you're someone else who's interested in an INTJ, how can you get closer to that INTJ? How can you build a better relationship with them? So the biggest flaw that I tend to see INTJs make when it comes to romantic relationships, and this is going to sound weird, but it's trying too hard. So if you're an INTJ, the odds are you've spent the first 15 to 18 years of your life, if you're over 18, probably relatively solo. They're one of the types that are the least likely to kind of have a romantic partner all the way through the high school process. It's not uncommon for INTJs to graduate high school without ever having a girlfriend, for example. And if that is you, don't feel bad as an INTJ. You're just not naturally going to be one of the people who's probably drawn to romantic relationships right off the bat. It's something that kind of develops later in life. Now, what's weird about this is that it's not uncommon for INTJs to want romantic partners at these stages in their life, but it is uncommon for them to act on something that might lead to a relationship. And that INTJs tend to be exceptionally cautious because of their introverted intuition function, meaning that they're going to want to look at a relationship as some sort of long-term factor for them. They're not going to just easily jump into something that might just be a one-night stand as easily as some of the other types might be interested in doing so. For an INTJ, if they're committing romantically to something, that's a huge investment because they have to let up their introverted feeling guard for a moment to allow someone else into their emotional space, which is going to eventually lead, hopefully in their mind, to something in the long term. INTJs are not known for wanting to do shorter term relationships unless they are at a point of stress in their life. So as an INTJ, this is actually something that you have to be aware of when you're in your romantic stages in your life, when you're looking for a romantic partner, is that not necessarily every relationship has to be some sort of perfect long-term, 50-year relationship. And what's actually really important to recognize is that having the experience of shorter term relationships might actually be beneficial to you if you're looking for a long-term relationship. Because the idea of marrying the first person you ever date is possible. That's actually what I ended up doing. My wife was actually my first girlfriend. But I don't think it's something that's going to be realistic for every INTJ out there, and that you want to maybe build experience by having relationships beforehand so you're less awkward when it comes to actually developing and interacting with other people in a romantic way. So earlier I mentioned INTJs and trying too hard. What exactly did I mean by that? Well, the problem I see with INTJs, especially if they're younger, is that they might often be desiring a relationship to the point where they're not focusing on developing themselves as individuals. So a young INTJ might come to me and they'll be like, oh, I just wish I had a girlfriend. And then I have to ask them the question of okay, so what do you bring to the table when it comes to a relationship? because you're not exactly strong emotionally. So you're not going to have that like emotional openness that someone might be looking for in a romantic relationship. Like, what do you have other than the desire for a relationship? And that's a hard question for INTJs to answer a lot of the times, because when they go into the realm of looking for a romantic partner, they step out of their natural realm of proficiency and developing some sort of like mental skill set that maybe they are good at, or developing just some sort of skill in general. They essentially step away from proficiency into awkwardness, and that makes them oftentimes, more than not, less attractive in the eyes of others. So this is actually something that I think the 16personalities.com website did right when they were talking about INTJs in relationships, in which they stated the fact that INTJs tend to be at their best when they're not trying for relationships. More often than not, you're going to find that INTJs who work on themselves to become better people are going to have partners that are more likely to come to them and develop relationships with them because of their skill set, because of their interests, because of their proficiency in a certain skill. This is going to be a common trend across almost all of the TJ types, who tend to build relationships or attract others through proficiency, through some sort of skill in some area. This can be in anything. It doesn't have to be something necessarily intellectual. But INTJs are going to find more often than not that when they work on themselves, as opposed to kind of putting themselves in some sort of awkward place by searching for a relationship, they're going to find that they're more likely in the long term going to have an easier time finding a romantic partner. Now, this doesn't mean that if you have some sort of skill that you're working on that involves you being locked in your room all day, that you should do that. You know, if you're someone who works in coding, for example, it can become very easy to just lock yourself in your room and code away 10 hours a day, and you're not exactly going to be able to attract other people to you in that sort of manner. But getting into some sort of work environment, social environment, active group that allows you to participate in that skill while also interacting with and meeting other people who share the same sort of interests, I think is going to be a better option for INTJs than actively searching for some sort of romantic partner and putting themselves in some sort of awkward position in doing so. That's really the weird and hard part for INTJs, is that the more they search for romance, the more they try to find a romantic relationship, the harder it tends to be for them compared to some of the other types who might have a much easier time with this due to their emotional openness. Because an INTJ will approach someone and try to be romantic, try to build some sort of romantic relationship, but then they act awkward in like one little way and they shelter themselves away because their FI is kind of having a hard time with the whole situation. So if you're an INTJ, the best thing that you can do, in my opinion, is work on yourself first and foremost, and then put yourself in an environment where you can interact with other people who have common interests based on the skills that you are developing and who you are and what you're building within yourself. And then maybe you're more likely to have someone who's going to come to you and initiate that relationship. And that doesn't mean that you can't reach out and say hi to someone first, but I do think it's going to be a problem more often than not if you reach out to someone with romance initially in mind and try to build towards that, instead of having someone else reach out to you who maybe they have that in mind, and then you can show that you're a competent, capable individual who can reciprocate those kind of feelings, and you have the potential to be a person with skills. Essentially, it's complicated. It doesn't mean that your entire romantic life has to be built off of just skills alone, but it does mean that if you are someone who has more competency, it's going to be easier for you to find romantic partners, because that is, as a TJ, your natural strength. Let's say you're on the other side of this conversation. Let's say you're interested in an INTJ. How can you approach an INTJ? How can you develop a romantic relationship or friendship with an INTJ? Well, the most important thing to do would probably be just to be the one who initiates the conversation, because INTJs typically aren't going to initiate conversations or friendships or relationships with other people unless they really have some sort of strong desire to do so. And as I mentioned earlier, if they are the one to initiate, it tends to be awkward because they're not usually the ones who are very good at the social dating game. And in fact, they tend to get really frustrated when it turns into the more like flirting type of thing that you typically see with maybe other more common personality types who are interested in that type of interaction style. This doesn't mean that INTJs can't do that. It just means that if you look at the averages, you're not going to find many INTJs who are going to be very good at the flirting and dating game. So be the one to approach the INTJ. It doesn't mean you have to just confess your feelings for them, but it does mean that if you're the one to initiate the conversation, they're going to be more likely to talk to you than not. Now, this can be a problem because this doesn't mean that the INTJ is just going to magically like you, and you can't guarantee that they're going to be interested in you. But it does mean that you're probably never going to find out unless you try with an INTJ, because they're not typically the ones to approach you. So, big piece of advice: approach the INTJ first, be the one to initiate the conversation, and just keep the ball going for a while. And you'll actually find that if you initiate the conversation with them more than a couple times and they're responding to your text, they're responding to your conversations, and maybe even sometimes they're the one to start a conversation after you initially are the one to introduce yourself, that generally means that they like you and find you worth their time. And that's a big thing for INTJs, because INTJs typically don't like to waste time, and they're not going to want to message people who they don't feel like they're getting some sort of long-term investment out of. And I know that sounds kind of like counterproductive when it comes to like romance or relationships, but that's how INTJs tend to think. They tend to think of romance and relationships as like a long-term investment, which is another really important thing to think about if you're going to be interested in an INTJ. Don't waste their time if you're searching for something that is more like a short-term fling, one-night stand. That's actually maybe going to be even harmful to the INTJ, who typically sees most relationships as something that they're looking for a long-term thing out of. Now, again, you can find INTJs who might be interested in the more short-term flings, but I think that is the exception, not the rule. So treat the potential for a relationship seriously. If you're interested in an INTJ, don't treat it as something playful. Don't treat it as something throwaway. Treat it as, I only want to be with this INTJ if it's actually maybe potentially going to lead to something that might be long-term. That doesn't mean you have to think right off the bat that it's going to lead to marriage, but it means you're at least going to consider it a potential future outcome for the both of you, because that's going to be something that the INTJ sees as extremely valuable. No INTJ is really going to want to make a decision and invest a lot of time and energy into another person if 4 months later you're just going to break up and all of that energy and time is going to be wasted. That doesn't also mean that they necessarily want to make it lead to marriage or the forever relationship, but it's going to be something that they're going to see as a time investment. So if you're interested in an INTJ, approaching them and treating the relationship as something that has the potential for a long-term outcome is something that is going to be really beneficial. So what are some common misconceptions when it comes to INTJs dating and relationships? Well, one is that INTJs tend to be super heartless or cold. INTJs actually have a very cold exterior typically because of their extroverted thinking presenting style, but introverted feeling and even introverted intuition are very valued functions to them. And you can find that a lot of INTJs actually have a lot of emotional depth. Now, they're not typically going to share this even with their romantic partner. Maybe if you're like an NFP or just an FP in general, you can like squeeze it out of them occasionally. You might be able to get them to talk about some of that more easily, to share with you that internal world. But I think in general, INTJs have a very rich internal emotional world and even a moral world that they don't ever really want to talk about, not even with the person who is closest to them in life. And that is something that might be a problem for some of the FJ types out there. I know myself, I'm married to an ENFJ, which is not a typical romantic partner for INTJs, and one of the struggles that we faced, especially early on in the relationship, is that I don't like to talk about my emotions. It makes me extremely uncomfortable, and it's an extreme stressor for me. And as an FJ, my wife really likes to talk about her emotions. It's kind of like the number one thing that's really important for her to do. If, for example, she's having a stressful day, or even if she's having a good day, she wants to talk about the positive emotions. If I have a bad day, I don't want to talk about it. If I have a good day, I don't want to talk about it. It's my emotions. I don't need to share them with other people. And I feel like a lot of the INTJs are going to feel very similarly. One of the worst things that you can do, and I'll repeat this, one of the worst things that you can do if you're interested in an INTJ is pressure them into sharing their emotions, because they do not want to. And if you pressure them, that's going to be the quickest way to get them to leave you or the relationship, because that is not their natural communication style. You have to recognize that if an INTJ is having a stressful day, 9 times out of 10, they're going to want some alone time to process that emotion. And then when they are ready, they will come out and they will speak to you about it. And when they do speak to you about it, it's typically going to be through the lens of extroverted thinking. And it's going to be very rational as opposed to raw and emotional, like you might see with the types who have extroverted feeling in their function stack. INTJs are not naturally going to resort to expressing their emotions in times of stress or even happiness. And you have to recognize that many INTJs are going to be very middle ground when it comes to emotional expression. Now, there actually are positives to this. What do I mean by positives? Well, INTJs, because of their preference for like a middle ground when it comes to emotional expressions, typically also means that they're not going to be very angry at you. If you talk to people who are in relationships with INTJs, it's very hard typically to get an INTJ upset or angry unless they are going to be on the very neurotic side. Most INTJs that I talk to tend to be very level-headed, and when they're confronted with an emotion that is not something that they're usually interested in like interacting with, they're going to try to respond to it calmly and rationally. And because they're not a thinking first type like you might see with the ENTJ or the INTP, INTJs actually tend to be a little bit more patient when it comes to other people's feelings. And they're going to be a little bit, I don't want to say more empathetic because that's going to be person to person, but they typically tend to have more patience when it comes to interacting with others and their emotions. For example, one of the qualities that my wife says she likes the most about me is that I'm patient with her. Because for me, it's not really a stress listening to her emotions. It's just like, yeah, whatever. Like, you can talk about your emotions. That's not going to make me emotional, though. And as long as you don't pressure me to share my emotions in return, we're perfectly fine. I will listen to you talk about your emotions and be emotional. Just don't expect me to have that exact same response in return. And that is something you might have to recognize if you're interested in an INTJ, is that they're not going to have the same method of emotional expression as you, or maybe they might if you're an introverted feeling type or type who has introverted feeling as well. So just be patient with INTJs when it comes to their emotional expression. It's not their strong suit. It typically is never going to be their strong suit. But also remember that they're not as actually cold as you might first interpret them to be. A lot of INTJs tend to be kind of patient when it comes to interacting with others and their emotions if it's someone that they personally care about. All right, I hope some of this information was helpful to you when it comes to either if you're an INTJ in a relationship or looking for one, or if you're looking to be in a relationship with an INTJ. Let me know down in the comment section below, what did you think of this video? Do you have any advice for INTJs or for people who are interested in INTJs? Don't forget to click my link down in the description box below for Boo. Check out Boo. They were the first sponsor to this channel, and that's something that's really important to me, and I would never lie to you when it comes to something that I would want to promote on this channel. I'm only going to promote things if I genuinely think that they're a product or an app or something that's worth your time. So go check them out, support the channel by clicking the link. Thanks so much for watching. I would like to remind everybody that I do have personality typing sessions available as well as coaching on my website at asurapsych.com if you're interested in working with me to find out what your personality type is and what that means for you. This is Asura from Asura Psych. Have a good one.